What if I told you meat could sit on your shelf for 25 years and still be perfectly fine to eat? Come along with me while I make some shelf-stable meat for my pantry. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Today I'm going to be doing some long-term food preservation. But before I get started, I just want to let you know that today's video is part of a collaboration hosted by my friend Natasha over at The Budget Preppers. This collaboration, going on the whole month of May, is called May It Last, and it's all about the many ways that we can preserve fresh food to make it last for our long-term pantry. Natasha has put together a playlist of all the videos that are part of this collaboration. I'll have that playlist linked down in the description of this video so you can go and check out all the other videos. I've also linked Natasha's channel, The Budget Preppers, down there as well, and I encourage you to go check out her channel and subscribe. They've got a lot of neat things going on over there. If you like our channel, I'm sure that you will love The Budget Preppers as well. The Budget Preppers is also doing a giveaway for this collaboration, and I will have the link for that giveaway down in the description box as well. It's a giveaway for an Amazon gift card, so don't forget to go down and check out the Budget Preppers channel, check out the May It Last playlist, watch some videos, leave some comments and some thumbs up, and then head on over and fill out the form to be entered in the giveaway. It's easy peasy. The drawing will be held June 2nd over on the Budget Preppers channel. Thank you, Natasha, for everything that you've done putting this collaboration together. Food preservation is such an important integral part of prepping and self-reliance, which itself is a huge part of preparedness. Being self-reliant and able to provide the things that you and your family needs if suddenly there comes a time that we aren't able to get things from the outside world. It's also a great way to save some money, so this really could not be more timely. There's one item that's very highly desirable in a prepper pantry, and it's the one thing I most often see folks striving to build a supply of. Unfortunately, it's also the one thing that usually takes the biggest bite out of the budget, and that's protein. More specifically, meat-based proteins. Yes, there are other ways to get protein in your diet, and some of them are less costly. However, for most of us, unless we're vegetarian, we really like to have some meat in our diets. And there are certain nutrients that are more difficult to get through a plant-based diet. So for most of us, meat is important. I am super cheap though, and the way meat prices have been rising, I won't pay those prices. It's gotten very expensive to buy meat. It's gotten expensive to raise meat. Any way you look at it, meat is expensive. I always keep an eye on sales, and I have my trigger price for each kind of meat. And when I see a price below that point, I buy as much as I can to get us through at least until the next time I find a price that good again. I stock my freezers, but if you've been watching me a while, you know I am actively trying to reduce my dependence on my freezer. And I certainly don't consider my frozen food part of my preps because it's dependent on the electrical grid and it could all be gone just like that. So I try to use shelf-stable ways to preserve my meat so that I don't have to worry about the grid going down. Canning has always been a go-to, and now that we have our home freeze dryer, I love having the option to freeze dry our meat. Some of the reasons that I love freeze drying it: for one, I love being able to use the meat in my meals in a jar. Two, it gives a longer shelf life of 25 years. Now, I know home canned goods have a considerably longer shelf life than the 18 months that they quote you on the package of the canning jars. But 25 years, I think, would be pushing it. Usually when I see folks finding jars that old down in grandma's basement, at that point, they're dumping the jars and trashing the contents. A third reason that I love freeze drying meats is that for some meats, and especially ground meats, which we use a lot of, the texture is just so much better. If you've ever canned ground beef, for example, you know the texture, it changes, it does. And not everyone can stomach canned ground meats. So today I have 3 different kinds of meat that I got on sale. I've got ground beef that I got for $2.49 a pound. That's a good price for my area. Now, I would love to hear from you all down in the comments about the prices in your area, your typical prices, the best sale price that you can usually find, and how those prices have changed over the last few years, because I know this can be very different depending on what part of the country you're in. Or even if you're in another country altogether, we would love to hear from you too. But $2.49 is a good price for ground beef in my area. $3 is my trigger point for ground meats. I try to never pay more than that, although it's getting harder and harder to do that. I also have some pulled pork that I made from, I think it was a pork butt, and I think I paid 99 cents a pound for that. I know it wasn't more than that. It might have been a little bit less, but it did have a bone in it, so that was bone in. And then I have some ham. I got some whole hams, and I did pay 99 cents a pound for those. I'm very excited to get these freeze-dried and shelf-stable and ready for my pantry. I'm especially excited for the ham because I already have lots of ground beef and pulled pork that I've bought from Thrive Life over the years, but they've never had ham available in all the years that I've been shopping with them. So I'm excited to finally have some freeze-dried ham on my shelves and be able to include it in some meal in a jar recipes. So let's get started. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start loading up my trays. Now the one tool that I do have here is my little digital scale, because you need to be careful not to overload your trays. I have a medium, a Harvest Right medium. This is the size of my tray, and I should not exceed 2.5 pounds of food on this tray. If it's something more liquidy, like a soup or a broth, I think it's more like 2 pounds, and you don't want to go too far over the rim of the tray, especially obviously not with a liquid. Is she even gonna work? Maybe my battery died. All right, we are back in business. I got a new battery for this. It's all zeroed out, and it is weighing in pounds and ounces today, so that's good. I have that set right. So the tray itself weighs 1 pound, 6.6 ounces. This particular tray, they can vary a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and zero it out so that I'm just looking for the 2.5 pounds that can go on the tray. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add some of this ground beef right to the tray. This has been cooked, drained, and rinsed with some hot water to get off any additional fat that might have been in the meat. I mean, it's not going to be completely fat-free, but it's getting rid of that additional that can cause a problem with the longevity of the food. I think I am going to fill this tray up physically long before I reach the maximum weight capacity. We're just over 1 pound now. Get this all spread out. All right, now this is just over 2 pounds now. It's about 2.25 pounds, and I think this is about as loaded as I want to go with this. Now keep in mind that for 1 pound of hamburger, it's about 2 to 2.5 cups, the conversion. So this is quite a bit of hamburger on here, because obviously the cooked hamburger is going to weigh less than it originally did because you lose all that liquid and all that fat. So I'm going to call this tray ready to go, and we're going to go ahead and get our next tray ready. For my next tray, I'm going to fill it with some pulled pork. Now I had this pulled pork in a Ziploc bag, so I actually went ahead and just weighed the bag of pork, and it weighed just about exactly 2 pounds. So I know I can put this all on my tray if it fits, so I'm going to go ahead and put my scale aside. And I'm just going to go ahead and load up my tray with my pulled pork. Now I think this was a pork butt. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was bone in. I threw it in the crock pot. Now when I do my pulled pork, I usually throw some soda in with it. I use either something like a cola or a cream soda or a root beer or something like that. This time I happened to have a part of a bottle of cream soda that had gone flat, and it was the perfect thing. I just dumped the liquid in with the pork in the crock pot, and I put that on to cook all night on low. Actually, I think I used the slow cooker setting on my Instant Pot is what I did, because I have a very big Instant Pot, so it fit in there better than my crock pot. But I ended up shredding that, and that night we had barbecue pulled pork sandwiches for dinner, and then what I had left over I just stuck in the fridge. I just rinsed this now just to kind of get it loosened up and rinse all that excess fat off of this meat. I rinsed it with hot water. I just use hot tap water. Now, a lot of people will use boiling water or boiling broth and just put it in a pot or a bowl with their meat and let that soak all the fat off of it, and then let the fat rise to the top, and they let that cool and take the fat off that way. I'm not that concerned about getting every last bit of fat off of this meat. Just from talking to different people who've been doing this a long time, it's starting to seem like the amount of fat in the meat might not be as big of a deal as people tend to think it is, as far as the longevity of your food is lasting in your storage. And for me, this is going to be a revolving supply of freeze-dried food. We're not going to put this away and just expect to break into it in 20 years. This is going to be something that we're constantly using and constantly replacing, and I'm not going to expect to have any of this around really for much longer than a few years, because if you're rotating your food supply, that's just kind of the way it works out. So there is a tray of pulled pork all ready to go in the freeze dryer. Now for my next tray or two, I'm going to go ahead and do some ham. Now this is the ham that I have. This is just a shank portion ham. This is just the cheapest ham that I could get. Every year at the holidays, each holiday, a certain meat, goes on sale really cheap. And every year I stock up on, several, as many as I can fit in my freezer, in my canner, or in my freeze dryer. So at Easter time, it's hams. At Thanksgiving time, it's turkeys. At St. Patrick's Day, it's corned beef. So I always stock up on the meat when it's on sale. So I grabbed several of these. We had one for our Easter dinner. If we had significant leftovers from our Easter dinner, I could have freeze-dried that, but we did end up using it all up. So I also have a few recipes that I usually make when I have leftover ham. So that's all gone. So I've got one of the other hams. I have not baked this because hams like this are fully cooked. You really are just heating it when you bake it. So I didn't bake it. I did rinse it off with hot water just like the other meats. And I'm going to go get my electric carving knife, and I'm going to see what I can do with cutting this up into the size pieces that I would like to have it in. All right, so this is my electric carving knife. It's just a Hamilton Beach. This is actually pretty new. I just had to replace my electric carving knife because I dropped my old one on the ground and I broke it, and it was not fixable. So this is decent. I usually just go for the cheapest one I can get. I love having an electric carving knife. This makes carving meat so easy. I never had one of these for the longest time. I thought they were kind of just a silly, worthless, little gadget, until my sister brought one from my grandmother's house when we did a holiday one year. And I used to stress out so much about carving a turkey or carving a meat like that because it was so difficult for me. But when we tried the electric carving knife, it was so easy. We fought over who got to carve that turkey. So I went out and got myself one, and I've never looked back. But the one thing that I don't love about the carving knives that I've had is the cord. It always seems to be in the way for me. And so I looked, and there are some cordless versions. Of course, they're more expensive, but that's kind of on my wish list for myself. I'd really like to get a cordless carving knife so that I don't have this cord in the way. The one thing I have noticed about this Hamilton Beach cheap knife that I've never had happen before is that the blades seem to pop out on me every time that I use it. Like every time I stop and start again, the blades have popped out. So I don't know if I got a defective one or if it's just, how this one is. I don't remember the brands I've had before, but I've always had the cheapest one I could find. So that gets a little bit old on this one. So I'm going to just attack this. Of course, this has a bone, and I'm just going to try to cut off some big chunks, and then I can take the slices into strips or chunks or dices or whatever size I decide that I would like to have my ham in to use in recipes. I could also freeze dry some larger slices just to use in like a ham dinner. So I may do that as well. We will see. Take off that big hunk to start with. And then I think I will slice. Let's see. Just going to pull some off the fat. We don't want all that fat. Now I think ham is going to be one of those meats that might be a little different in terms of the shelf life. I know that when Thrive Life used to sell freeze-dried ham, they no longer sell ham. I'm not sure why, but it could be because of this. It was one of the few meats that they sold that did not have a 1-year shelf life after opened. All of the meats, all of the freeze-dried meats have a shelf life of 25 years in the can when they're sealed in the can with their oxygen absorber. But most of the meats, the chicken, the beef, they all have a shelf life of 1 year after they're open. I mean, give or take. The environment you're storing it in and the humidity and the temperatures and things like that, they're going to affect it a little bit. But for the most part, those meats can last at least a year after they've been opened up out of their can. But there was a few exceptions to the rule, and ham was one of them. And that was only just a few weeks after it was opened that it would be good for because of the type of fat it had, not because of the amount, but because of the type. Supposedly it could go rancid faster. I never got to try the ham that Thrive Life had, but it was the same situation with their pulled pork, which I have tried many times, and I've had that open a lot longer than that, 3 weeks, and it's been fine for me. So that's probably just over-exaggerated for, safety and customer satisfaction reasons. But I am going to be a little bit careful with my ham that I freeze-dry because I have a feeling it's going to be a little bit different than your typical meat, which is kind of strange because if you think about it, ham is so heavily cured and heavily, treated like that I feel like it tends to have a longer shelf life than most meats when it's fresh. But we shall see. I just wanted to throw that out there. Now, any scraps I get that have meat on them, I'm going to put them aside because I'm sure I'll be using this bone to make some broth and to make some split pea soup and things like that. So I can put any of these chunks that I trim off that have meat on them, I can use as I boil my bone for broth. Now, I don't know if the electric knife is going to be the most efficient thing to use to cut the smaller pieces. It's kind of overkill, so I'm probably just going to use my little, although it does cut through them so easily. Because this is my little Rada knife, and I really like these Rada knives, but this is It's not as easy as the electric knife, but. So I'm just going to go ahead and make these into little strips for now. I really think that this is, and then maybe I'll cut these strips into smaller, like I don't really want dices, but I'm not sure what I want. I would be using these probably in meals in a jar or casseroles and things like that. And so that's what I'm thinking of when I'm deciding what size and shape I want to cut these. Now, if I make a strip like this, this could probably pretty easily be snapped in half after it's freeze dried. And so I could get a smaller piece. So it might make more sense to leave them larger, because then you'd have the option of the larger piece or the smaller piece. But part of the beauty of, you know, preparing things and freeze drying things is to have things exactly the way that you want them, so that it's just less work for you. If you do have to use these in an emergency, everything's ready to go. You know, everything's cooked, everything's chopped, everything's, you know, diced just the size that you want them, and it just makes it so much easier when the time comes to actually use these items. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get more of this cut up, and then I will bring you back when I'm ready to get it loaded onto the trays. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my scale right here. I'm going to go ahead and set my tray right on the scale, and I'm going to start putting the ham on as I go. That way I know when I've reached the limit of the tray. If I reach the limit of the tray, and I'm not going to keep cutting up more ham that I don't need. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and zero that out. And I can go ahead and spread this around after I get it all on there. This is just for weighing purposes. So now I've got all 4 trays ready to go in the freeze dryer, and what I did end up with was 1 tray of the ground beef, 1 tray of pulled pork, and then I did do both of the last trays full of ham, so I did an extra tray of ham. I could have done an extra tray of the ground beef, but when I thought about it, I realized I have plenty of freeze-dried ground beef down in my food storage because I've been buying it for years. And the ham is something that I've never had the opportunity to purchase freeze-dried, so I have never had freeze-dried ham in my food storage. And while I had that ham out, I figured I needed to cut up the whole thing, and it was actually the perfect amount to fill these 2 trays with about 2 pounds of meat on each tray. What I found out is it really didn't work that well to leave the scale on the tray as I was cutting the ham and filling it, because the scale kept turning off. I think I wasn't adding weight at a fast enough pace. I had 2 long stretches when I didn't add any weight, so it would turn off. So I just ended up weighing the whole tray, and I knew basically what each empty tray weighed, so I weighed the whole tray when it was full and subtracted the weight of the empty tray, and that gave me basically the general amount of meat that was on each tray. So these are ready to go in the freeze dryer. I'm going to get it turned on, and then we'll load it up. Now I'm going to go ahead and get our freeze dryer turned on, cooling off, and ready to run our food. We do have a Harvest Right medium. Now the menu settings should be right about where we want them, because they do save the menu settings if you customize them. I'm just going to go in and check. The biggest thing here is to have the extra dry time. You definitely want to have extra dry time. You're almost certainly going to need it. And this way you don't have to worry about the machine finishing when you are sleeping or when you're not home, when you're at work, anything like that. If it finishes, it's going to kick into extra dry time. It's going to keep going. You can stop it at any time after that and check and see if it's done, and then resume the extra dry time if you need it. It's impossible to over freeze dry your food, but you certainly want to make sure that you don't under dry anything. I'm just going to go ahead and hit start. So now it's cooling the vacuum chamber, and in 15 minutes it'll be ready for my trays. Okay, we're in business. I'm just going to close the drain valve, and then I'm going to get my trays loaded. Now, before I got my own home freeze dryer, I remember thinking that I was going to need like a cheat sheet with a whole list of instructions, because I would never remember everything I had to do to run this machine. I was so intimidated. Well, it's very easy. Literally, I pretty much have to do one thing: close that drain valve, and it tells me right here on the screen to do it. So it's basically impossible to forget. So our meats are all tucked in and ready to freeze dry, and now I'm just going to go to bed, and this is going to take care of itself all night, and it'll still be drying tomorrow and most of the day tomorrow probably. And I will check back in and let you guys see how it comes out and how long it took. Okay, now this kind of surprised me. This has been running just over 12 hours. Well, it's been 14 and a half hours now. And it just went into drying mode this morning after we woke up. And it already says that it's dry and it's on extra dry time. So it's actually been on extra dry time for about half an hour, which would have made this a 14-hour cycle. That kind of surprises me. Here's what it looks like. I guess it could actually be dry. Now, I could take this out right now and I could test it. We have our thermal imaging camera. I don't really know how to use it, so I'm going to have to wait for Mr. Wicked Prepared to get home to help me with that. I could weigh these trays and then put them back in and run them longer and weigh them again in a couple of hours and see if they've lost any weight, and if they haven't, they should be done. That's a couple different ways that I could test this, but I'm just going to let them keep going because I'm actually in the middle of some stuff right now and it can keep drying. I have a feeling it's probably not completely dry, especially in the middle of those mounds of meat like that ground beef, for example. But I'm just going to let it keep going. I have never had any load besides candy be done as soon as it says it's done, as soon as the machine sensors are telling it that it thinks it's done. So I'm going to let this keep going and I'm going to check it a little bit later. Now, if I had pre-frozen this would have cut down on our time considerably. If you have a freeze dryer, you probably realize this. If you don't, it's something to keep in mind. If you can put things in pre-frozen so that the machine doesn't have to freeze them itself, that's going to significantly cut down on your processing time. But like I mentioned, we just don't have the extra freezer space right now to really do that very consistently. We are looking at purchasing a dedicated freezer just for our freeze drying setup, and that should help a lot. It's still cold, huh? Funny. Is it cold spots or is that the tray? Looking good? Okay, so we checked these one final time this morning and they're definitely done. Now this lower tray read a little bit cool, but that's just because it's down at the bottom and it was so close to the ice in the machine. We checked all these pieces and they are definitely dry. Okay, so here they are. All of my trays are finished and out of the freeze dryer. You can see they don't look a whole lot different than when they went in, but this is completely dry and crispy. If I was to take a piece of it, just snaps in my fingers. Same with the ham. And these are actually super tasty to snack on just dry like this, especially the ham. If you are always looking for a low carb, shelf stable, easy to pack with you snack like I am, certain meats like sausage and ham and things like that are really delicious just to eat freeze dried. So there is a look at all of the meat that we did. I am just going to give this a few minutes to return to room temperature. When they come out of the freeze dryer, they're a little bit warm. And so I want to get them to room temperature to avoid any kind of condensation issues, moisture issues, anything like that. And then I'm going to start by putting these into mason jars. Probably half-gallon mason jars is going to be the way that I'm going to start with this. There's someone in one of my freeze drying groups who always does her stuff this way. And she's a pretty experienced freeze dryer, so she really knows what she's doing. And she always puts things up in mason jars for a month before she puts them up in Mylar, just to look for any kind of moisture issues, anything like that. It's kind of along the lines of how you would condition your dehydrated food when you were done with your dehydrating before you put that away for storage. So that's what we've been trying to do a lot of. Okay guys, look at this. Now I have all this meat shelf stable and ready for my pantry. One thing I haven't done is add oxygen absorbers to these. I really like the technique of putting it up in mason jars for a month first, keeping an eye on it and making sure there's no moisture issues or anything like that. And then adding the oxygen absorber and putting it up in Mylar bags. What I would really like, to be perfectly honest, is I would love to get a number 10 can sealing system, because we all know number 10 cans really are the gold standard for this kind of thing. And they're much easier to store than Mylar bags, in my opinion, especially when you're talking about freeze-dried food, which is fragile and prone to crushing and crumbling if it's not in a rigid container. If there's anyone out there who does have a can sealer, I would love to hear all about it down in the comments. The pros, the cons, your tips, the best place to get one, all the things. Tell me down below. They are pricey, but if I want something badly enough, I usually find a way to get it eventually. But I will need to add oxygen absorbers to these if I intend to put them in long-term storage. If they're going to be used within a year or so, they're just fine without it. Now this ham, I can tell you right now, it's not going to make it into the long-term storage because I don't have any freeze-dried ham, so I'm going to be playing with this. I'm going to be testing out some meal in a jar recipes with it. I'm definitely going to be snacking on it because it is super yummy if you need a low-carb snack. So this is not going to be around for the long term. Now, I did mention, just from what I know from the commercial freeze-drying world, I do suspect that the ham may not last quite as long as the other meats without the oxygen absorber. You know, it might go rancid earlier, but this way I'll also be able to kind of test out that theory a little bit. I'll mark the date that I did this, and then if I do notice any kind of rancidity at any point, then I'll have a good idea of how long this can last without the oxygen absorber. That's also important to know, because even if you do put this up for long term, once you eventually do open it up to use it, you're going to want to know how long you have to use it up once you've opened it up. So for anyone who's interested in preserving meat this way, if you don't already have a home freeze dryer, I'm going to put links down below for you to check out. If it is something that you've been wanting, Harvest Right, which is the brand that we have, they have a huge sale going on right now, so it's the perfect time to finally take the plunge. And even if it's not something that's in your budget right now, they always have a giveaway going on their page, and every so often they give away a home freeze dryer. So you can at least click on over to their site and enter the giveaway. And if you already purchased a freeze dryer and you actually happen to win the giveaway, then they do reimburse you the value of the freeze dryer prize. So that's pretty awesome. And if you don't have a freeze dryer and you're not in the market for one, because not everyone wants to do this at home or has time to do it themselves, just like canning and dehydrating and all the other methods of food preservation. Not everyone wants to do it or has the time or the space to do it themselves, and sometimes people just aren't comfortable doing it themselves, and they would rather just purchase it and have someone else do the work and have the know-how, and there's nothing wrong with that. So if that's you, you can still have all the benefits of freeze-dried food in your home and in your pantry by purchasing it commercially. And then you also save yourself the hassle of dealing with the raw meat, cooking it, shredding it, slicing it, preparing it, checking on it and worrying if it's done completely, packaging it up. That's all done for you. For some people, that right there is golden. So I'll also leave links down below for the companies that we know and trust and recommend for our freeze-dried foods that we've purchased. Thank you for coming along with me today for this little project. I hope you found this video helpful and maybe learned a thing or two. If you did, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up to let me know, and subscribe if you aren't already so that you don't miss any of our future uploads. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me one of these meat emojis down in the comments. And check out this playlist right up here to see some of the ways that I use our freeze-dried foods. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.